Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of JKL Media, your podcast where we talk all things pop culture. I am the J in J, which is Jesse. I have K, Karen,
Hello.
and I have L, which is,
Hello.
and we are recording this on June 22nd. We are only 5 days away from the release of Bruce Springsteen's Lost Albums, seven new unreleased albums, and you can imagine I am like a kid right before Christmas. But we are not here talking Bruce. We are talking here my other obsession, Aaron Sorkin. I remember watching Sports One, going to see The American President, and loving that film. Watching A Few Good Men, loving that film, and loving Sports Night. And then once West Wing came, forget about it. I became just this massive Aaron Sorkin fan. So anything that Aaron does, I'm immediately in. Whether it's the social media, the Molly's Game, which is a really good film, the Ricardos, and with all the political stuff, I picked the Trial of Chicago 7. And so I'm looking forward to talking about this with two of my bestest friends. Karen, you want to give us some quick thoughts of the film?
Sure. I'm with you on Aaron Sorkin. I haven't watched everything, but I gotta say, Sports Night, The West Wing, The American President, Studio 60, they were all like huge things that I just adored. Sports Night in particular
I agree.
was crazy good, and I'm sad that Studio 60 didn't get a second season.
Me too.
there there's just so many things he does that I feel like he throws his whole heart into, and I love seeing anything that he's done. And The West Wing has to be on my to watch list. It's just so big that I haven't gotten around to it yet.
Yeah.
But I watched The American President, which is the precursor to that
Yes.
series. And it's one of my very favorite like romance type movies. It's so good. And
Yeah, I love that film.
me too. And it was a joy to watch this Trial of the Chicago 7 because it combines a bunch of stuff that I love. I love history, and especially from the 50s and 60s, and anything that's like intriguing. It's like a court drama. I love all that stuff. I love that counterculture mindset. And then to have Aaron Sorkin directing it, I watched it when it came out because I really wanted to see it. And then I watched it again, and it's just as enjoyable the second time around.
Good. Lou?
So I'm not as familiar with Sorkin as you guys are. And I think one of the reasons is that he just strikes me as very American. And as a non-American, that is a bit of a turnoff to me right off the bat. So I'm not a big
Okay.
fan of the guy, to be honest. The few things that I've seen of him, I have enjoyed. But I think that for this particular choice, Jesse, it was pretty prescient of you because we're sitting here on Sunday morning on June 22nd, the day after President Trump has decided to bomb Iran. And I thought of this trial in the through the lens of history repeats itself, because I feel that there's going to be a lot of trials from this administration. Whether they're coming in the short future or down the road, we'll have to see. But it's just amazing how an administration can manipulate the judicial system into doing what it wants behind the scenes. And I think we're going to be seeing a lot of that. So I found this a very interesting choice from that perspective. I thought that the movie was very entertaining, and the only worry I have with it is with most dramatic adaptations of real events, the for me, it's always really important to be as true to the actual events as possible. And from my understanding, there's been a fair bit of dramatic license with the events that happened in this during this trial. But the spirit and the essence of what happened in it, while I found at times might have been a little overdone dramatically, I still think it's worth everyone watching, especially in the context of what's happening in today's world. And the old adage, history repeating itself, I think is more than apt for what this movie was all about.
Yeah, I was reading a little bit about it. There was one historian said, I'm a little worried that this is what people are going to remember and not the reality. For example, Aaron talked about with the Ricardos, there were three main storylines: them thinking she's a communist, her being pregnant, and Desi's affairs. And he, for dramatic purposes, put them all happening in the same week and I do think that's a common. It is always one of the things I do is after I enjoy a movie, I will go back and I go, okay, what did they change to make it a better film? For example, the Dylan film, they changed a few things, right? And you kept the spirit correct, but not necessarily. Stay with you, Lou. Thoughts on the cast?
As we mentioned off air before we started, Sacha Baron Cohen. It was a dead ringer for Abby Hoffman. People complaining about actors not looking like the historical characters,
Yeah.
I thought were quite good. You could go down the whole cast. I don't really think there wasn't a weak performance in the whole group. I think that Eddie Redmayne as Tom Hayden was probably the most interesting character in that he was how he was conflicted. I'm also curious how Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character of Richard Schultz as the prosecutor, how accurate that is to real life, because he was what I would call an honest, right-leaning prosecutor, but he still had a sense of morality about him that a lot of the other characters didn't have on both sides, for that matter. Interestingly, this is a little behind the scenes. Found watching Frank Langella. It's Langella, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. As the judge. Interesting because I know that because that judge was a very difficult character and not easy to get along with, to say at least, during the trial. In real life, Gale has also been labeled as a difficult actor. And I know for a fact that he originally played the role in The Fall of House of Usher that Bruce Greenwood ended up doing because Mike Flanagan just couldn't put up with his bullshit anymore and just got rid of him and brought Bruce Greenwood back in to the fold to take over his part. So
interesting. I did not know that.
A lot of good, quite a large cast and a lot of good characters in it. And I have no complaints about any of the acting, that's for sure.
Karen.
Yeah, there's a lot of points there. I loved the cast in this. I think that you're going to be surprised at how much of this is real. It was definitely compressed, and there were some characters added. The Joseph Gordon-Levitt character was quite a bit different, but for the most part, these characters really were, and as Sorkin says, it's a painting and not a photograph.
Oh, I like
That's what he has said about this movie. And I really do think that he captured a lot of the sentiment that went around this trial. Of course, he's really only showing one side of the events, but I think in this case, we were on the right side of history here. Yeah, and I agree. Things seem to be repeating itself, as was it Nietzsche that said that things are going to repeat themselves? I don't remember, but I hate how history is cyclical because there are so many things we shouldn't revisit, but unfortunately things are happening. And I wish we had learned from things like the trial of the Chicago 8/7. So
Yeah, what's even I think interesting is that this originally film came out in 2020, and we were talking about how timely it was at that time, and here it is 5 years later, and we've rinsed and repeated.
yep, we've
And
had a president in between,
yeah,
and
it
yet
just
we're right back here.
Yeah, I think that's just very odd, and a little sad. The I do One of the things that I was amazed at is the things that this judge did that okay, that's just shtick. And then when you realize, no, he didn't exaggerate this at all. This truly was a just someone who was blatantly incompetent. So any as we you talked about the characters in a whole, anyone you mentioned the Hayden character, anyone else that stood out to you, Lou, that you
Well,
really enjoyed the performance?
there's always a danger of a bit of stunt casting, but when Michael Keaton showed up, that kind of took me out of the movie for a little bit
Oh,
Hmm.
because he's just such a big recognizable actor that
Yeah,
I was seeing Michael Keaton and not Ramsey Clark as the character he was portraying. So that
yeah,
I think that a lesser known actor would have worked better there. I don't really know why they had to go to Michael Keaton for that. Nothing against Michael Keaton, in keeping with
yeah,
the flow of the story. I think if they wanted to have him in, they should have done that maybe at the top of the movie, so where you could, because you're seeing so many new actors, that all these actors all at once at the beginning, that seeing him wouldn't have been stuck out as much. But when he showed up three-quarters of the way in, I was like, whoa,
yeah,
what's he doing here? Is he going to be a big part of the movie now? But he's just basically an extended cameo. The other actor that, again, I guess he played the part, was Jeremy Strong as Jerry Rubin. I found the reason I really enjoyed Sacha Baron Cohen's portrayal is because Abby Hoffman was actually came across as a smart dude, but
yeah,
and it was funny because I think the first time we see those two guys together, I go, because they were doing like flashbacky stuff, I thought, shit, is this Cheech and Chong? like,
yeah,
like, who is this? And so that kind of colored my perception of the characters as at the start of the movie. But as the movie went along, Abby Hoffman turned out to be a really smart dude. But
yeah,
Jerry Rubin just stayed stuck in the Cheech and Chong
yeah.
vibe for me. Like he was just a stoner. That's basically all I got out of him. I think those were probably the other moments, actors that stood out for me for my own personal idiosyncratic reasons.
How about you, Karen?
yeah. I think Eddie Redmayne did a great job portraying Tom Hayden. If you were in California at any point during the 70s and 80s, was it the 70s and 80s that
Yeah,
he
I
was
think so.
active?
Yeah,
Yeah, I remember him as being this type of person. And of course, he married Jane Fonda, which put him even more in the limelight.
yeah,
I think he does a really good job. I think Sacha Baron Cohen is not someone that I go out to see.
yeah,
I'll tell you that right now. He's not my favorite person. But in this movie, he is so good.
He's the clear
Uh,
standout for me.
he is
yeah,
definitely.
Yeah.
And he played Abby Hoffman so well. And I think that Jeremy Strong played Jerry Rubin well too, because he's pretty much that guy. He was a second fiddle wherever he went. And
yeah,
I love how his life ended up. I'm sure we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I really, and I think that Mark Rylance played William Kunstler very well as well. I know when I watched this the first time, I saw some interviews that were done with him before he passed, and he's very much that guy. He had wild hair. He always played for
Yeah,
the
that was the
underdog,
worst
and
comb over I've ever seen.
yeah, that was his thing. He
Yeah,
looked just like that.
yeah.
And
He
he
was good
worked,
too. Yeah.
yeah, he worked for the AFL-CIO and did a lot of really good things for labor and the counterculture, as we said. And I think as much as I think he's probably a problematic guy, I think that what's his name who played the judge? Why did Frank
Langella.
Langella?
Yeah.
yeah,
I think he did a great job as the judge in this. He was very, I think it's probably how the judge was. I don't know anything about him other than what
yeah,
I've read, but yeah, I think they were great.
yeah. You already talked about Jordan Gordon Levitt, and I
Yeah.
think the character he played, as he said, if you look at the Wikipedia page for this cast, Richard Schultz is not have a link to a real character. So I don't know if that's a composite or if that just wasn't something. But I tell you who I liked a little bit is the Ben Schenkman who played Leonard Weinglass. One, I really liked him in Billions. He was a really interesting character in Billions, but he felt a little bit like Kevin Pollak's character in A Few Good Men, right? The second in command of the Tom Cruise character, the main, and he had a couple of good lines. I think John Carroll Lynch is always interesting and no matter what he does. And they said, like, in reality, David Dillinger is the one who read all the names and it was in the middle of the trial. But I thought him, like the scene where he loses his temper and hits the guy, he is crushed because he just isn't a violence. And there was a funny scene where, like, you were a conscious objector in World War II. I hate you. The one of the comments Aaron Sorkin made, which I think is very fascinating, is the only person in this trial on this film that actually went to jail was the Attorney General, John Mitchell.
Yep.
So give me some thoughts, and I'll
It
stay with you,
wasn't for
Kate.
this.
No, but yeah, give me your thoughts on when at the beginning of the film when we're seeing Mitchell, they're talking about they're changing out from Johnson to Nixon, the film, and Mitchell talking about the grown-ups are in charge now. Any thoughts on, and I'm giving you a softball, current politics during those scenes?
Oh,
Yeah,
absolutely.
definitely. Trump is infamous also for anyone who is quote unquote outgoing. They're all enemies. And this is what plays out in this as well. The Michael Keaton character was enemy of the people because he didn't resign right away. And that's part of why this whole thing ended up the way it did, why they went to trial in the first place, I think.
Yeah.
And we know John Mitchell was incredibly corrupt. He, in case you don't know, Lou, he went to jail for the Watergate incident. He, in his whole career, it seems like he just was a toady for people that really did terrible things. And
In other words, he would fit in perfectly in today's administration.
yes, 100%. He
Yeah.
definitely would. And
the early version of Pam Bondi.
yep, 100%. And I am looking back at this and thinking we need more Abby Hoffmans right now. We need someone who's willing to stand up and actually be visible doing that. Because right now, there's a lot of people who are like, yeah, we're against Trump. Let's do something. And it never really gets the attention that it needs to. I feel like people are so afraid of what can happen if you go against the current administration that they're not willing to stand up. But you need to not be afraid. In this whole film, we see that Abby Hoffman is not afraid of anything. He's not afraid to die for his cause. He's not afraid to go to jail. He's not afraid to be out there and public about it. And there's so not anyone right now who's willing to be that figure. And it really bothers me. I would love to go out and do that kind of thing. Who cares? I have a condition that's going to kill me anyway. But I'm not that person. And we need to see that person, an author, an actor, an activist, someone who is willing to really go out there on a limb and be arrested for the cause. And so I feel like, yeah, I don't want to be in that same position like back then, but I feel like I do want those things that happened in this film to happen again. So part of me was depressed, thinking, why are we in this again? And part of me was like, I'm hopeful that something like this will happen again. If we're going to repeat history, let's repeat history.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's my feeling about it. And I loved the scene with Tom Hayden, Eddie Redmayne, and Michael Keaton because he said, you need to take a chance. And he gives him a look like, you want to shut up for a minute?
Yeah.
And then he says, I guess I did at the end of everything that
Yeah.
he is gonna go and testify. And I think it's that kind of thing that we need to do, that we need a Tom Hayden or an
Yeah.
Abby Hoffman or anyone like that, or even a Dellinger who wasn't a high profile person, but he was going against the grain for his generation. And there there really just isn't that.
I did like the scene where this is like every other protest. I'm going to do it and it's not going to make a difference. You
It-
still fight it. Lou,
yeah.
how about you? Thoughts on that?
I think that the thing that really struck me about the opening scenes when they were talking about charging the Chicago Seven with the crimes that they were is that they were using like a law that was intended for something else, really. And I think that we're seeing a lot of that today, especially with the Trump administration taking unilateral actions and then quoting some obscure or ancient 1878 law that allows him to do what he's doing without getting approval from Congress or whatever. I'm going to be curious to see how it plays out with the recent bombing. That was again unilateral action, that if he's declaring war on Iran, and he carefully did not use that word intentionally, is because Congress has to approve such actions,
Yeah.
and the president doesn't have the power to do that on his own. So we're seeing that being played out in present day, and we saw that in this Chicago 7 trial, same thing happening here, that they were perverting a law to use it to indict these people purely. And as Hoffman says throughout the movie, even though the lawyers in the beginning didn't agree with him, is that it was a political trial, not a criminal or civil trial.
What I love is that is exactly the note I made when I first started. I went, how often is that happening now, where
Yep.
this
Yeah.
obscure law and they're taking it and twisting it around? One of the other,
Presidential privilege.
yeah, one of the
he's
other
he's pushing for
characters,
that.
yeah, one of the other characters we haven't talked about is our guy from Watchmen,
Mm.
Yama Abdul Mateen, playing Bobby Seale. I thought he did a really good job as well. And I was fascinated that the the injustice of them throwing this guy in there with them.
Mm.
The idea that you have counsel. No, I don't. No, I don't. One thing in the facts that was different is that in the reality, according to Wikipedia, which we know is never wrong, Bobby Seale was able to get himself out of the gag and still able to talk. And they said the film more shows it just as being someone who is they were able to silence him, and people who support Bobby Seale thought that was important to know they couldn't shut him up. But any thoughts on his kind of mini part of the storyline, Lou?
I think that was a missed opportunity, not to show that he was able to get out of his gag, but when the judge said, if you shake or nod your head, then we will proceed, that you've
Yeah,
acknowledged that you'll be silent. I was hoping and waiting for him not to move at all. And
yeah,
just because that's really the only way he could continue to protest. And I thought that was a
yeah.
missed opportunity.
Okay, interesting. How about you, Lou,
Yeah,
Karen?
there's quite a few inconsistencies. Fred Hampton was never in court with him, which I get why he did it. It had a
Yeah,
huge impact on the story. His life was depicted correctly, though. He was murdered around the same time as this.
And Bobby
Uh,
Seals was found not guilty of that
the murder.
murder charge. Yeah.
Yeah, in
yes,
what, Vermont or somewhere in New England.
yeah,
Definitely. I think that the way he was depicted in this movie was so good, and it really highlighted how this group was handpicked in order to to shame every group that was protesting against the war.
yeah,
You had the intellectuals, the clean cut guy, you had the older guy, you had the counterculture, and then they throw the black guy in there in order to taint the jury a little bit, because
yeah,
back in the 60s, the people that are going to serve on a jury are not going to be sympathetic. And And then to show how corrupt they were, sending notes to the people that showed themselves to be
Yeah,
sympathetic. That was not the Black Panthers sending those notes. It was,
yeah,
you know,
exactly.
but yeah, him being bound and gagged was true.
Yeah,
And his case being severed was also true. And that was important to see, I think. And I like that we included his character because this is known as the Chicago Seven, but it started as the Chicago Eight. And there was a reason for him to be there in many different ways. So
yeah,
showing his character, even though he was severed from the rest, Aaron Sorkin could have left him out and still had it a true to life kind of story. And I do love that he included the Black Panther Party in this. That, and mind you, they are not angels. The
yeah,
Black Panther Party did some terrible things. And it just goes to show that you can be against the Vietnam War and not be a good person. It's a good cause, but that doesn't mean that you're
mhm,
an angel, as it were. I just like that they included him in this movie.
yeah. Another little role that was, I'm sure, just made up, but Caitlin Fitzgerald
Yeah.
playing the consult and the where Jerry Rubin's, does she ask about me?
Yeah,
Because he had,
Jerry was married in real life
mhm,
during that
mhm,
time. So Caitlin, there was no female FBI agent involved.
yeah,
She was definitely like the most manufactured part of this. But I
yeah,
do love how he was just so in love with this character. It was great.
yeah. Hey, man, that's just wrong. Yeah. There's a lot to talk about, but I don't know, there isn't a lot of breaking down to cover this. But I think Aaron Sorkin loves a trial setting. Like,
Especially government based.
yeah, like when he did the social experiment, having that in the trial. I don't know if either one of you seen his play about the inventor of television.
No,
Yeah. Oh, I'll look it up in a minute. It was the Farnsworth is the guy who actually invented television, and he ended up suing RCA. And it's a fascinating film. It is set up in a it's the Farnsworth invention. It was a small little run, and it is set with a play. I had tickets to see A Killing a Mockingbird here in
Mm.
Dallas, and Richard Thomas, who was playing the lead, ended up getting sick, and I was sitting in my seat, and they said, "We're being delayed, we're being delayed," and said, it's canceled. So I was
Mm.
very sad to see that.
That would have been great
to not see
to
that.
Yeah,
see.
huh?
To not see that.
Yeah, I know. I
Yeah.
was so sad. So, any other thoughts about the movie you want to share, Luke?
Yeah, there's a couple.
Please.
The whole, I realized this was taking place back in the late 60s, the trial, whatever. But for the trial to have a unrepresented person at the thing for that long, it happened in real life, but it just
Yep.
seems so foreign. Just procedurally, I just don't understand why the defense counsel didn't call for a mistrial because,
They
Yeah,
did.
but
like earlier, right?
Yeah, they did in real life. But
Yeah,
yeah,
and there was no outside tribunal or board of judges or whatever that were saying like this, you can't, this is not constitutionally allowed to have a defense person sit in a trial with no representation, and he wouldn't, and then
yeah,
he wouldn't even let him represent himself.
yeah,
nope,
If that's true, like that, to me, and history bears it out, is that the trial was thrown out or
yep.
appealed, and
yeah,
then the department decided not to follow up. So that I understand from a dramatic perspective that they were showing that they were making the jury hostile to the defense team because of the having this black person on the sitting at the desk there, but it just, in today's world, I just found that really hard to swallow. It kept on taking me out of the story because it was just such a blatant mockery.
That still happens in real life. It
I
still
guess. But
happens. But yeah, that's exactly what happened back then too.
yeah. So
It
there was that aspect of it. I do want to come back to Karen's point about she made quite a while ago about we were looking for people to rebels like these Abby Hoffman characters or whatever. You had that a little bit with George Carlin back in the day, and
Yep.
to a
yes.
smaller extent, Bill Burr could stand up to make his voice. But and then you look at like the Democrats, you make Bernie Sanders or Ocasio or
AOC.
Cortez, but they're different today than they were back then. I like Hoffman says he would put his life on the line. I don't think people would do that anymore. They're just too used to their creature comforts nowadays. Or there's, I think ever since lobbyists were allowed to be to finance or fund or make contributions to politicians, is that's what's been lost, is that fighting spirit, because people have been too conditioned, too bought out to really protest too much. So I do think that's an interesting aspect of the story, that again, history is repeating itself, and we're seeing that again here. The other thing, and this is a criticism that I've heard of Sorkin, and I agree to a certain extent, is there's a lot of speechifying. I think that's one of the reasons why he likes trial settings, is because he gets to do
Yeah.
a lot of speechifying. And there's this naivete about his writing in that he thinks a good speech will change the world. And I don't think that holds true. While we're seeing that, it makes for dramatic a good dramatic moment, but it doesn't translate to real world situations. People make good speech, like we're inundated with good speeches from people. And I realized this was a different era back in the 60s. They didn't have
Yeah.
social media, but if you look, you can find good speeches that like you can find 1,000 of them a day easily, but the world doesn't change. It just goes on. There has to be a collective, and this is the thing that Trump is good at tapping into. There has to be this, you have to be able to distill people's fears and, for lack of a better word, prejudices into a neat little slogan or soundbite or whatever. And that's what works. MAGA, woke, like all these kind of labels, these are the things that actually sway people. It's not these flowery speeches that Sorkin's prone to that will change the world. Everybody likes a good speech, but it doesn't, for a lot of people nowadays, especially with their view of government, those kind of speeches just don't really carry much weight anymore. The other thing that I was surprised, not totally surprised to find out, is that the trial end, every defendant got to speak and they all took their turn speaking. And this is another one of the moments of dramatic license where he has Tom Hayden reading off all the fallen soldiers
Yeah.
and the standing ovation. And I thought it was over the top, but and it, for me, slightly killed all the preceding messages that the story was trying to carry. I mean, that kind of ending works good in a Rocky movie or Adrian, but in something like this, I just don't think it was I just didn't like the ending that much. It just felt a little too neat,
Raw.
too raw, too, yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Okay. Karen.
Yeah, I got to admit, I like a schmaltzy ending, but knowing that it was not exactly what happened again, is in this case, it wasn't Tom Hayden, it was Dallinger who got up and he tried to read the names of the people that had died during the trial. The trial lasted months and he was shut down. He wasn't allowed to read them. He did not speak over the judge. And they did all get their chance to do a final statement. As far as the judge goes, I really do think that they got a good representation. And I'm going to talk about also Richard Schultz, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, a real character. However, he was never even close to sympathetic to the
Okay.
Chicago Seven. He was definitely a hard ass, and he went on to defend a lot of people that we wouldn't want defended now. definitely,
Hmm.
but
Yeah, it
are
says
being
he left the U.S. Attorney's office shortly after the case was over and became a private practice lawyer.
with that other counsel that he served with. They both
Oh,
opened a firm
oh,
together. Yeah.
interesting, because they didn't seem to get along very well in the movie.
Again, they were both simpatico when it came to prosecuting these
Uh,
people. I think that's a lot of it. There was some resentment in the film because of how he was wavering a little bit when it came to how to prosecute them, and in real life he wasn't. I love that Consular also was so great in that he went by the letter of the law, but he also showed that his heart was on his sleeve. He gets told, "Why don't you just represent Bobby Seale? Why don't you represent him? You're sitting right there." And he
Yeah.
says, "I've asked him," and he says, "No, I can't represent him." That's the law. That's how things work. As much as he wants to, he's not allowed to. And there was so much pushback. And to your point, Lou, this is how it works here. There's no real time criticisms of what happens in a courtroom. Judge Ito was criticized greatly for his performance in the OJ trial, but it all came afterwards because his word is law in the courtroom. And then the case can be
appealed.
looked over by a board of other judges afterwards, but nothing happens during that trial.
Yeah, no,
And
I understand the process.
right.
It's just in
And he
today's
was,
sensibilities, it just seemed so
it's
blatant,
foreign. I
so
know.
blatant. Yeah,
Yeah.
It
And
is.
again,
Yeah.
it still happens today like that.
yeah.
And he was sanctioned before this trial. He presided over, and I can't remember his name, but another counterculture person for an obscenity trial. Who
Oh,
was it?
the comedian.
Yes.
Oh,
God, who was it?
I know who because he was in the
Lenny Bruce.
Lenny
Lenny Bruce.
Bruce. Thank
Yes.
you. Yes, he
Okay.
presided over that trial.
Ah,
And when that was looked at afterwards by a board of judges, he was lightly rebuked. And he continued, even after this trial, when he was rebuked, he was not removed from the bench. And he served as a judge until the day he died. And I hate that that's our justice system. I hate it so much. The letter of the law is good, but because of how convoluted it is, it can be bent, twisted, just it can be manipulated to fit anyone's rhetoric. And not just that, but it's so cumbersome and nothing is ever done in the moment. Nothing. And it just really showcases that here. That judge was exactly like that. And that really makes me crazy that he was allowed, after all of this, to serve on this for this case as the judge on this case. And he was so heavily sanctioned afterwards that I would hope he'd be removed, and yet he wasn't.
Yeah.
There are judges that get removed for decisions nowadays. It happens every once in a while. The rape trial a few years ago of that boy where he got 3 weeks in jail. That was his sentence for being found guilty. That judge was removed from the bench. There are a few. It's very
Yeah.
few and far between, though. And this really does showcase our justice system. I hate to say it, Lou, but it really does. And anyone can be a judge as long as they're a lawyer and they work their way up. If there's someone, it's all networking. If there's someone who likes him that has power, they'll elect him as a judge in that area. And because right now we're so red leaning, we get a lot of federal judges appointed. Uh,
Yeah.
Honestly, in my opinion, shouldn't be there because a judge needs to be impartial. And that's the whole point of our system is that judges, juries, lawyers need to be impartial. Every case is one-on-one. They shouldn't be tainted by something else, which the OJ trial was. And they also should be treated as it's a blank slate. This person hasn't done anything yet, nor have they done anything until all the evidence is brought to bear. In this case, he was ready to convict them at the very beginning. If there wasn't a jury trial, if it was just
Yeah.
him, they would have been in jail. I love that they all were vacated, every single one of them. And again, it's after the fact, but it shows that sometimes our system works. And it might not be right when it is going on, but it happens sometimes. Sometimes people get put in jail for nothing and they stay there for the rest of their lives. And I'm glad it didn't happen in this case. And I think it backfired on them putting these people together, because what it did is it brought all those groups together fighting against the Vietnam War and all that stuff. It made everything so unpopular that we had no choice but to get out. And I wish that we would put all of these groups together, but right now they're all fighting against each other. And Lou said, we do have great speeches, but even MLK's speech didn't change the world. And his speech was so impactful. You're right. A speech doesn't change the world. And that happens in a lot of movies and television shows, but I want it to happen. So I kind of like it when a movie ends like that. That
Yeah,
makes sense.
it feels an emotional need. And just to clarify, I understand how your
Oh,
justice
no, I
system
know.
works.
I know
Yeah,
you do.
but I just still found it very jarring to see that, and because it was just so blatantly
Sure.
wrong.
And
Yeah.
But and I'm surprised actually that Trump hasn't done something with Eileen Cannon yet.
Yeah.
yeah, and I agree with both of you. I do agree with both of you. I want a speech to be able to change the world. And whether it's like Martin Luther King's I've Had a Dream or
Yeah,
the other things, it is, but you want that.
Right.
And I
absolutely.
think
Yeah,
that is in, we wish, I agree with you guys too, that there would be, like, I would love a Will Rogers character, a
Mm.
George Carlin character to be out and
Do you
sharing
wish
this.
George Carlin was around all the time? I really
Yeah,
do.
yeah,
I
yeah.
miss him a lot.
And I think one of the things that is always going to be interesting is of the change, how much do you change the facts to make a good film? Like I
yeah,
remember I loved Molly's Game, that film. And then when I read the book it was based on, the bones of the story were there, but a lot of the dramatic stuff he did with her father and the stories there was totally made up to make a good film. And that's when I go, okay, remember it's a film, not a documentary, Jesse. It's a film,
Right.
not a documentary.
It's a painting, not a photograph,
Yeah,
yeah.
and
which
I
I
think I
love.
love
I
that.
love
Yeah,
that saying.
yeah,
But I just find that the closer the movie sticks to real life events, I find that it's more
yeah.
impactful
Yeah.
than
Hmm.
throwing like the Hollywood endings on it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
There's something else I wanted to mention that hasn't really come up. Is
please.
one thing that shocked me, because like I said at the beginning, or maybe it was before we started the podcast, is one of the most interesting find about these kind of movies is the cards at the end with postscript cards where they show
Right.
Yes.
what happens to everyone. It doesn't. I don't even think it mentioned it in this movie, but Abby Hoffman committed suicide in
Yep.
1989, and
I-
that totally shocked me, given how he was portrayed. And I understand that this is a movie and it's not, but this guy just seemed, and I don't know how accurate the portrayal was, but he just seemed so full of life, so dedicated to a purpose. And on the brief little research that I did here while we're talking, I guess he became disillusioned with where politics had moved to in the 70s and the 80s
mhm.
and become very corporate, and there was no appetite for any sort of protest against the status quo anymore. Is that enough for somebody to get depressed enough to kill himself? I don't know, but as you get older, that fire doesn't burn as quite as bright anymore. So maybe he just didn't have the appetite to continue the
Mhm.
protests anymore, or he got to like the Rocky movies. He lost the eye of the tiger.
Yeah.
He became
Yeah.
domesticated. But there's even some people that are saying that they find his death suspicious. But
Yeah.
the amount of drugs he took seems like that would be pretty hard to, I don't know. It's hard to say, but I just found that really shocking.
Yeah.
Yeah. At the time, his mother had recently died. He was still being hounded by the FBI. He had undergone some facial reconstruction surgery in order to stay under the radar. I feel like maybe he was really tired of bumping his head up against the wall. He was also really sad that he was getting older. And
Yes.
there were so many things that led to it. I get it. I understand. He was incredibly vibrant and full
Mm.
of, but then so was Robin Williams.
I was just going to
So
say
was,
that. You just
yeah,
can't tell. There's another guy that I never would have suspected
yep,
being capable of doing something or being driven to a point to do something like that, which is so sad because
it is.
these people are so in their own ways talented and the world needs these kind of people, but they're also seem to be very tortured. And it again, it's a cliche, but very often the comedians seem to be the most conflicted people in their personal
Yep.
lives.
And even Anthony Bourdain, who he seemed really just vibrant, up for anything. And his real life was, he was tortured. And a lot of people who have such strong emotions, when they get depressed, they're just as strong.
I
Yeah.
guess so.
And yeah, I'm sad that he died like that. I think Jerry Rubin was also incredibly sad. He decided to become a stockbroker later in life, and he said, if I'm going to be an activist in the 80s, I'm going to do it from from the most impactful place, which is in money. And then he was crossing the street one day and a car hit him and he died. That's just such a waste.
That seems in character with his character because
Uh,
he was such a stoner.
yeah.
But it's interesting that you said that about a stockbroker. To me, that's just the perfect example of how people are so able to rationalize their
Yep.
behavior,
I agree. Yep.
self-delusion.
Yeah. He's never going to change anything by being a stockbroker, but that was his, hey, I got to
Yeah.
go into money. Let me do
Yeah.
something. There's a few of them that are still alive, not many. Weiner is still alive. Bobby Seale is still alive. And I think John Freund's either he just died or he's still alive. But they're like in their 80s now, but still, Weiner is still being interviewed and is out there talking about things. But I just, I know one person's not going to save the world. When I said we need someone to be that
Hmm.
Abby Hoffman, we need more than one person,
Yeah.
definitely. We need a group to
Yeah.
come together and fight against the machine. And I can't see that happening. I really can't because
Yeah.
all of
There's just too much media.
and we're
Yeah.
deluded as
People are
well.
drowned out.
We're sectionalized and BLM isn't everyone that's fighting in a certain way, and women's rights, they're not fighting for a certain, no one wants to band together and do all this as in anti-Trump period or whatever. So we're never going to get that, I don't think, unless something extraordinary happens like this trial. We need something to unite the left, and
Yeah.
I'm depressed. I don't think I'm
But
ever going to see it.
I'm sad to say that I don't think so either, because I just
Yeah.
think that look at where we are now. Like we've had Trump reelected, and this guy is a criminal. And
Yeah.
and people, what is the most common thing you hear about people say about Trump is, oh, I don't like the things that he does, but I like the things that he stands for.
Right.
To me, that's a total
It should
cop
be
out.
the other way around,
That's a total
right?
cop out. You can't,
Right.
you should not be behind somebody that morally you find repugnant, yet he will carry out the edicts that you believe in. Like the two shouldn't be
Yeah.
divorced from one another. If a person is not of good character, they should not be given the power to do the things because they're not of good character and they're not going to do good things. Like
Right.
Yeah.
I
They
just
don't
I
do
just
those
don't get
things.
that. It's like from just to throw in a tangent, to Canadian perspective on what's going on with free trade, and I don't know if you follow that, but tourism has been hit hard in the States because of this. And there was these, I think that last weekend, there was a bunch of Maine or East Coast governors were meeting with the premiers, which are their counterparts in Canada, and saying to them, like, we want you to come, we like you,
Yeah.
and so forth. And the Canadians are saying, we got no problem with you, but you're talking to the wrong people. You need to be going up your command chain and telling those people what they're saying or doing is what's the problem. And like the thing with a 51st state comment, like, I
Ugh,
don't know, a lot of people treat that as a joke, but in Canada, it's galvanized us in a way that
it's
I've never
not a
seen
joke.
before.
That's the unfortunate
That's
thing.
no, it's very insulting. And
Hmm?
Yeah.
and we always have this big brother, little brother relationship with the States. And if the States wanted to, they could steamroll over us easily. So that's why we have to that's why we're standing up in the way that we are. And it's the same kind of thing that's going on with people being behind Trump, even though they don't agree with him morally or his moral behavior. So it was, and another thing I wanted to mention that we didn't is, it's interesting that the Department of Justice was falsifying evidence in this trial and harassing and involved in jury tampering. And I think one of the parallels we're seeing right now is we had this Tulsi Gabbard
Yep.
report about a month ago that Iran didn't have, was nowhere near having nuclear capabilities. And then Trump coming on the weekend and saying that they were close to having nuclear capabilities. I think there's going to be, down the road, there's going to be trials about this. And I think that's the kind of thing that's parallels what happened in the Chicago 7.
She's not long for the administration. As much
Probably
as I
not.
don't
Yes.
like her, but she's going against Trump. And I do think that he has galvanized a group, which is
Hmm.
his strong point. He has a huge group of people that are rooting for him. And the point that you made about he has a terrible character is what should alert people not to vote with him, because
Mhm.
he never does what he says. He was elected on a certain set of morality and mindset as to what he was going to do when he got into office. He's already proved this with his first administration, that he doesn't do what he says. Sometimes he does the opposite. People are starting to say, I can't believe I voted for this, because they're losing their health insurance. They're still paying a lot at the grocery store, sometimes even more. Just things are getting worse for them. And they're finally saying, oh, really? Did he lie about that?
Yeah.
When all of us were telling them he's lying.
Yeah. It truly
So,
is.
yeah, it's sad.
Yeah. And the comes back to, and that's why I wanted to talk about this film, because I thought that it would lead to a pretty good discussion, that there are times when Linda and I just look at each other and go, I can't believe. I just truly cannot
Yeah,
believe that. And there are many people who, for whatever reason, they want this. They want the chaos. It
yeah.
doesn't matter if it hurts me, if it hurts you,
If it hurts them,
yeah, if it hurts a liberal and you're like, oh, then I'm glad. I'm just
right.
loving the chaos.
And
And
if you have money, even better.
yeah, and so it incredibly sad, and I'm really happy we got to visit with this. Karen, did you have any final thoughts?
No, that's pretty much it. I
Okay.
think this is well
Sorry,
worth a
listeners, that
discussion.
we got so political.
No,
Don't,
I knew this would
come
come up.
on.
Yeah. Yeah,
How can you not be political with this?
I
Right?
just loved seeing this, and the acting, the dialogue is really well done. I do think it's a funny story. He went to lunch with Steven Spielberg, and Spielberg said, I want to direct a film about the Chicago Seven. I'd like you to write it. Would you be interested? Aaron, of course, says yes. And then he says he got in the car and called his dad and said, can you tell me who the Chicago Seven are?
Oh no. Oh no.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, that was an interesting choice, that he didn't show the events of the what the trial was about. It just was very tight, snapshotty moments
Yeah,
to
Well,
back up. And for a lot of people that don't like have the knowledge of it, it was an interesting choice.
it was one of money.
Kept it more
yeah.
focused on the
Yeah,
trial itself than the events leading up
yeah.
to the trial.
When they looked at the budget, he did not know how they could recreate the riots on the budget that they had. And so he decided that by focusing on real footage and then just very tight scenes of what had happened,
Mm.
he could push the story enough and stay within, because this is not a big budget film. And so that's the reason. It was creative reasons. And he actually said, by the way, he said similar to Shark Jaws, where because Bruce was acting up, they had to shoot around that. He said, we were doing the same thing. We shot around it.
Mm.
Beep, changing the subject.
Popcorn.
Yeah, Paramount Plus. I think it's Paramount Plus. One of the channels has the 50th anniversary of Jaws.
No.
And Steven Spielberg had a little 3 or 4 minute blurb about I can't believe it's been 50 years. And so I'm halfway through watching the film again, and I'm going, wow, this really holds up.
It
Yes, it
does.
does.
I
It
mean,
does.
it
Aided in
really,
There,
large
really,
part by John Williams' score.
there are a few
yeah, yes,
things.
yeah,
We've come so far with CGI and everything.
yeah,
It looks a little rudimentary, but man, it's still scary as F.
yeah, it is.
It the crap out of me when I was a kid.
And this, like the scene where, the mom whose son was killed and she mad at Brody, and you just the unfairness of that because he wanted to it. So anyway, that's my recommendation of the week. If you
Movie of the day.
yeah, but yeah, it was definitely worth going to see again.
I just add,
Sure, please.
I love when a movie sparks me to look something up afterwards.
Yes.
Mhm.
And I think that is something that I wish everybody did. When you
Mhm.
watch a movie and you're like, oh, I wonder what really happened here, go and look it up, research it. Even if you
Yeah.
only take an hour afterwards and look things up, you really do learn a lot about something. And one of my edicts in my real life is to learn something new every day. I try very hard to do that. And this is a great way to do that, to watch a documentary and then look up the real life stuff behind it. I love documentaries. And that's one of my favorite things to do is to go in depth and dive into a rabbit hole about the subject and find out more. So this, like you said, it doesn't show the protests and everything. It shows little snippets. And so I would hope that someone would go, oh, what are they on trial for? And go and look it up. I don't know how many people do that, but I advocate it highly.
Yeah.
Amen.
Absolutely. All right, Karen, if someone wants to reach back to you, how can they?
You can email us at jklmediareviews@gmail.com. And I am at Aleveria, Aleveria, on social media. And my blog is alistuff.com.
All right. And Lou, what do you got going on?
Not too much, but we do have a Stephen King podcast that will be coming out shortly where we reviewed Never Flinch on the my YouTube channel, Lou's Reviews. You can find our archived review of the entire series of Babylon 5 plus the 2023 animated movie, as well as my writers pod interviews and the aforementioned Stephen King podcast. On Twitter and Blue Sky, you can find me at Lou W. Sitzma. And for just a quick recommendation, my wife and I just watched last night Final Destination Bloodlines,
Mm,
and it was a hoot. And yes, it's gory, but it's pretty funny at the same time. And it also, I believe, has the last on-screen appearance of Tony Todd.
yes,
And they allowed him to do his own dialogue for his final lines in the movie. So a nice little cameo Easter egg by him in this movie as well.
I love how poignant it was. I watched that clip and
Yeah.
so poignant.
Yeah.
I am at Jesse Jackson DFW on Twitter, aka X. You can find me talking music on Set Lusting Bruce. Coming up the second week of July will be a week of nothing but I have gotten, because of the 7 new releases Bruce is doing, I have outsourced. So I have 7 different guests joining me.
Wow.
Each of them picked an album. And so we're going to record those and then I'm going to release them all just one after another to discuss. And so that should be a lot of fun. On Perfectly Good Podcast, we're continuing to talk every John Hyatt song. We are still in the middle of L. And Next Stop Everywhere, we're going back to talking Classic Who. So please join us and go to iTunes, rate and review us. We would love some 5-star love. If you have any suggestions on what you'd like us to cover, as Karen said, send us an email, send something to us on X, smoke signals, whatever you want. We will figure it out.
That's right.
We were debating before we hit record whose turn it was to pick next. So we aren't quite sure, but we will be back in a week to talk about something fun for sure. But for now, for Karen, for Lou, I'm Jesse. We appreciate you. Be safe, be kind, and we'll talk soon. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. And scene.
The proceeding has been a JKL Media production.